Where's your bag?
I don't know, I wanted to ask you.
Tell me. I got mine.
Oh, there we go. Keep going.
This is Gene's college room.
Hello and welcome to the tank! Alright, I have a little spiel I have to give you before we get to what you came for. So welcome to the tank. We are a home for emerging artists, connecting artists with free space to share their work and help remove the economic barriers to creation. That means we always need support through money or time, so please see me if you're interested in donating or volunteering. And if you don't have money or time, you're probably an artist too. And that's great! You should still come see me after the show because we want to put your work on our stages. We do it all from traditional theater, music, dance, puppetry. I like to say that if you can think it, we want to help you make it happen. So please see me after the show and I will guide you on how to submit a proposal. Also, Tank NYC or sign up for our newsletter on our website, thetanknyc.org, to stay up to date on programming, opportunities, and more offered here. Please keep your phones off throughout the entire performance. This is the pause I take to make sure the phones are off. Thank you so much. And in case of emergency, please file out of this lighted exit door and make your way out of the other lighted exit door in our lobby, and keep making your way downstairs to 36th Street, same way you entered the theater. And tonight, you'll be seeing Stumbling Stones, the John Rosenberg story. You are not here for this show. You're in the wrong place. That's okay, we all make mistakes. Just follow me as I make my grand exit and I will get you to where you want to be. However, I will say you are in a pretty great spot to watch a pretty great show. And I do just want to note that there is an 80-minute runtime with a 10-minute intermission and a talk back afterwards with John and Jean. Okay, that's enough from me. Enjoy!
There are things meant to make us stumble, not to harm us, to slow us down, to remind us someone stood here before, someone will stand here after. They're called stumbling stones, and they ask only this: carry something forward, a memory, courage, the work undone. Because when we stumble, we have a choice: walk on, untouched, or rise, carrying something we didn't begin with. 1970, Kentucky. Jean and I, along with our 5-month-old son, Michael, pitch a tent in Jenny Wiley State Park. I walk every trail. I look behind every stump. I asked the park ranger twice. No bears, no wolves. Jean, she looks at me with that twinkle in her eyes, and she says, "Any lions and tigers?" No, but I will look for flying monkeys next time. The next morning, we stand in a square in Prestonsburg, Kentucky. A diner behind us, the courthouse across the way, park benches where old men tip their hats as we walk by. It doesn't take us long to see the whole town from where we stand. And Jean looks at me and she says, "Maybe this is home?" I don't know. I'm walking too fast, talking too fast. I'm thinking about how we can get in, set up a legal aid office, and then get out. That's the plan. At least that's how I keep it safe in my head. Standing here in this square, seeing how the mountains fold in around the town like tired arms, cracks on the courthouse steps. I start to feel it. Something I haven't felt for a long time. 1937, Germany. My family, we lived in a second-floor apartment in Magdeburg, Germany, apartment 202C. My father, Rudolph, a school teacher, my mother, Gerda, my younger brother, Harry, just a toddler at the time, and my grandmother, Therese. Below our apartment was a courtyard. It had cracked cobblestones, drain pipes that rattled in the rain, laundry lines strung like banners in the wind. That courtyard was my whole life. It's where I learned how to ride a bike. I must have fallen 100 times that day, wobbling past the garbage bins and the cellar doors. I remember my mother leaning out the window, clapping and laughing every time I went a little bit farther than the fat lass. Across the courtyard, perpendicular from our apartment, was the synagogue. It's where my father helped with the services. He read from the Torah. He worked with the rabbi to keep the community strong. You know, one time a man came to town, Dr. Mosher. He was raising money for Jews who were leaving Europe. The rabbi told him to take my father with him. Rudy knows everyone. Friday nights, the lights from the synagogue windows would seep across the cobblestones. The music and the prayers would rise through the evening air. It was where neighbors gathered. It was where our faith anchored us. It was where, even as a boy, I knew I was part of something larger than myself. It was home. Standing there in that square in Prestonsburg, Kentucky, I carried that memory with me. You know, I'm not some big shot. I'm not some crusader come to save the day. I'm just a young lawyer carrying a memory of a place where community matters. And I want to build something. You know, something that will matter to people who don't expect anyone to stand with them. So when Jean looks at me and says, maybe this is home, I stop. I listen. I really listen. Maybe it is. So we make plans. We'll move here. We'll set up that legal aid office, help where we can, stay maybe a year or two. So we head back east to pack and prepare. Meanwhile, a meeting takes place. This is where we should have looked for wolves. Gentlemen, I'll get right to it. We've got a problem. One that if we don't get a handle on right now is going to fester and spread till this town don't belong to us no more. Now, a man like John Rosenberg, he don't come to a place like Prestonsburg by accident. No, sir, he comes when the ground's been softened, when folks get restless, when outside money starts coming in, and that is exactly what's happening here. He wants to build a legal aid office, funded by Washington, crawling with lawyers who don't know a coal miner from a cornstalk. They'll sue our business, they'll clog up our courts, they'll go after coal operators, landlords, the very people who built this town. And it ain't just about the law. Rosenberg. You know the title. Don't talk like us. Don't think like us. Now, I don't mean just because he went to one of those fancy Eastern law schools, Lords know that would be enough. He's one of those glorifiers of the poor. One of those radicals that thinks that men like us, hard-working men, business owners, property owners, that we're the enemy. If that were all, we could ignore him. But a man like that, with his connections, his background, I did some asking around. It turns out he's been whispering in the right ears up in Washington for years. Department of Justice, Civil Rights Divisions. You know, it's the same ones that are sending lawyers down south to stir up trouble. And now he wants to set up a law office here under the same banner. I sent a letter up to Washington. I told them plain, the establishment of this office will introduce dangerous outside influences that do not reflect the values of our community. That's what I wrote. I told them something else too. This is how it starts. First it's lawsuits, then it's regulations, and it's some fancy new government commission telling us what we can do with our own businesses, our own land. Well, gentlemen, this is where it stops. Any man who helps him, who rents him office space, even shakes his hand, is going to find his friends stop returning his calls. His tenants start looking elsewhere, that the banks aren't so generous with their loans no more. Gentlemen, this is our town, and it's going to stay that way. 1938, Germany. We're in our apartment. I'm in my bedroom. The door is closed. I can hear my father on the other side of the door. Goethe, I put all the papers in the satchel. The immigration papers, the receipts, the boys' birth records, the passports, the list of everything else we need to do. You know the one, the black one with the broken handle. I put it behind the stove, under the floorboard, under the second crate. I need you to know where it is in case something happens to me. Gerda, something has happened. They're using that boy, Herschel Greenspan, the one that you know shot the German diplomat in Paris, the one that the press doesn't tell you saw his parents, Polish Jews, dropped at the border like so much garbage. Goebbels gave a speech tonight in Munich. He said, "The Jews are to blame. Let the German people strike back. Let the German people handle the situation on their own." I went by the party headquarters on the way home. There were stormtroopers everywhere. Hitler Youth in uniform, laughing, excited like they were waiting for a parade. I spoke to a man I know on the fire brigade. He said his orders were clear. They were to be prepared and stand back, but only protect the Aryan homes. Gerda, this has been growing. It started first in Nuremberg with the laws. They took away our citizenship. No vote, just Jews. And then the boycotts, the signs on the Jewish shops that said, "Don't shop from the Jews." And then they wouldn't let our children go to the schools anymore, so I started teaching them over at the synagogue. People we've known for years, that we've broken bread with. They crossed the street to avoid being seen with us, some from fear, but others embracing the hate. Yes, Gerda, we thought that if we were quiet enough, if we were careful enough, they would leave us alone. But that is over now. Now we must prepare for the worst. I fear they may be at our door tonight. 1971, Kentucky. After the landlord backed out of our lease due to that local pressure, we opened our first office in Jenny Wiley State Park in a cabin. And the Appalachian Research and Defense Fund started seeing clients. Apple Red saw the first client. Mr. Rosenberg, I don't know if you can help. I never had much to do with lawyers. You know, I grew up on that mountain, like my daddy and his daddy before him. We worked the land. It was hard work, but it was ours. At least I thought it was. You know, I built that house with my own 2 hands, raised my boys there. Now the coal company shows up and they say they own the coal underneath it. They can do whatever they want to get it. Say my granddaddy sold it to them for $5 back in 1902. What the hell? My granddaddy can't even read. Now they got bulldozers up on the ridge. They're tearing up the whole damn hillside. Every time they blast, the wall shakes so much my youngest thinks it's a tornado. That well we've been drinking out of all these years, it's dry, gone. Air smells like diesel. Every morning I wake up to a fresh coat of dust on the porch. And they don't give a damn. They just wave that deed in my face like it's the word of God. You know, my wife, she says, maybe we ought to pack up. Move on. But I don't know. I just keep thinking, why are we the ones that have to leave? Why do they get to come in and destroy everything? You know, I don't want to leave, Mr. Rosenberg. This is my home. But they got lawyers, they got money, and I got you. My client said that I was the only hope he had of saving his home. Tikkun Olam. That's Hebrew for repairing the world. It's a call to action that my father instilled in me since before I could walk. Tikkun Olam. It's the world is broken. And it's not enough to grieve for it. Our duty is to fix it. Tikkun Olam reminds us that every moment we stand with someone who has no other champion is a stone in a path toward a more fair world. That weight of knowing that sympathy is not enough might seem like too much for any one person to carry, but it's exactly that weight that gives our life purpose. Tikkun Olam. 1938, Germany. Kristallnacht. Couldn't sleep for the sound of it. The glass kept shattering. They were breaking the windows of all the Jewish stores. The glass, it was like thunder over and over again. They were smashing their way through our lives. We were home, my family, my parents, my younger brother, my grandmother in our apartment. We could hear them coming up the stairs. And then they were pounding against the door. They were smashing against the wood like they were going to break right through it. And then the door swung open and they were there. There were Nazis, there were soldiers that were in our apartment. We knew one of them. His wife, Elizabeth, was the midwife that helped my mother in this very apartment the day I was born. He made like we shouldn't recognize him. He ordered us up and rousted us out and down the stairs into the courtyard. They were going back and forth to the synagogue. They were bringing out the Torahs, all the prayer books. They piled them in the center of the courtyard and put them on fire. My mother, she was standing there holding my younger brother in her arm, my hand with the other. Next to her was that soldier, that Nazi, the one whose wife's hands caught me as I came into this world. Standing there with the rifle slung over his shoulder, staring into the flames. My mother, she turned and she looked at this man with a gun and she said, "Are you going to kill us?" I didn't say anything at first. Then he turned to her and said, "I don't know." That's all. I don't know. When it was over, after they dynamited the interior of the synagogue, we went back up to the apartment. There wasn't much left. They ransacked it. They take a pickaxe to the walls and to all the pictures. My parents, they pulled a mattress and into the kitchen, and that's where I slept that night. 1895. Another meeting takes place. More wolves. Titans of industry. I want to tell you about a new kind of deed. It's a time machine. No, really, wait for it. It's called a broad form deed. Elegant, efficient, brand new thinking, revolutionary. Now, you see, when you buy a piece of land, the old-fashioned way, you buy the surface and you get the rights to the minerals underneath it. But if there's somebody living on the land, they're farming it, maybe they've been there for generations, you got a problem. They won't sell it to you. But with a broad form deed, you just buy the mineral rights. Coal in this case, and we put in there that you can come in however you want, whenever you want to get your coal out. Let me read you some of this language. It is beautiful. The mineral owner shall have the right to enter upon and use the surface land in any such manner as may be necessary or convenient for the purpose of mining and removing the coal. Necessary or convenient, that's the magic. Surface owner can't say no. Yeah, sure, we can't get to that coal now. The hills are too steep, it's too hard to tunnel, but it's the future. My engineers tell me it's coming. 20, 30 years, they're going to have machines that can tear through a mountain like a layer cake. So think of it like this. You're buying coal futures. You pay pennies today for rights that will be worth millions tomorrow. And all you need is a piece of paper signed by a farmer. I got a bundle of these ready. You pay once, and you mine forever. My father taught me that justice doesn't just happen in the courtroom. It happens through small, everyday acts. patching a neighbor's roof before it rained, setting an extra plate at the table for somebody who's hungry, sharing what you have, because that's what right looks like. It's called tzedakah. Some people say that means charity, but the best you can come in English is righteous giving. Not out of pity, but because that's what justice looks like. Tzedakah. And if you really want to understand what tzedakah is, look at what Jean was doing while I was representing clients and building an office. She was a young mother who just moved to Prestonsburg from Washington, D.C. She didn't have a title, she didn't have a paycheck, but back in D.C., she had child care, childbirth classes, prenatal support. And when she got here, she saw right away what was missing. There were no childbirth education, there was no prenatal transportation, follow-up support, so Jean did what she knows how to do. She started the first ever natural childbirth classes in eastern Kentucky. She would gather women together. She would teach them about their bodies, about breathing, about labor and delivery, about their rights. You know, for many of these young women, it was the first time that anyone had ever spoken to them as capable, deserving mothers. It was about more than childbirth. It was about agency, confidence, care. You know, Jean, she builds things quietly, carefully. She builds relationships, community, home. Me, I confront things. I fight for justice. I had a law degree, and I had the best legal upbringing that any young lawyer could hope for, working with John Doerr at the Department of Justice. Now, I didn't go to law school to be rich. I was looking for a compass. I needed to see the law do more than just serve the powerful. And I saw that in John Doerr. You know, John Doerr marched James Meredith through the gates of Old Miss with the governor and half the state against him. When black sharecroppers were evicted for trying to register to vote, it was John Doerr who brought the case. You know, he would tell lawyers, not just FBI agents, get out in the field. Don't sit at your desk. Go find out by yourself. Years later, when 3 young activists in Mississippi were murdered for trying to register black voters, Goodman, Cheney, and Schwerner, it was John Doerr who led the prosecution. I knew to be the kind of lawyer that I wanted to be, it started with him. So when I had the opportunity to sit opposite him, I hope I learned the right to stay in the room. 1962, Washington. Mr. Doerr, I want to thank you for interviewing me. You asked why me? Why this job? See, when my family, when we first immigrated to New York, it was difficult getting work. There were too many immigrants, not enough jobs. So we moved to South Carolina, where many Jewish immigrants found work in the textile industry, often in mills owned by other Jewish families. I was just a kid. I was trying to figure out what it meant to be an American, what it meant to be Jewish, and what it meant to be a Southerner, in a place that lets you know when you weren't one of them. I saw the discrimination firsthand, the colored and white water fountains at the movie theaters. The blacks had to go in the back, sit up in the balcony. At stores, they were always waited on last, no matter how long they'd been waiting. But to be honest, I didn't think much of it at the time. We were so happy to be here that we didn't want to rock the boat. My family, we would have taken any society that they plumped us down into. And now I'm disappointed that the Jewish store owners, that they weren't more vocal. They didn't speak out, but they were afraid if they spoke up for integration that their stores would be burnt down. It wasn't until much later that something happened that led me to be here talking to you today. Oh, Mr. Doerr, I have always been a hard worker. I started as a kid I was up before dawn on my bike, swinging the Spartanburg Herald before breakfast. After school, it was Scouts. I made Eagle. Lots of camping, lots of leadership, lots of knots. After school, I developed photos in a studio. I worked at a local store, learned how to make change, look people in the eye. I went to Duke on a scholarship that I lost by making too much money working too hard in the dining hall. I majored in chemistry. I did ROTC. After I got my degree from Duke, I enlisted in the Air Force, 1953 to 56, just as the Korean War was winding down. Stationed in England as an officer and a navigator, B-29s, SA-16 amphibious albatrosses, plotted Great Circle routes. We dropped off special forces on secret training missions in Germany. We'd help trawlers who were in trouble, help to rescue them. You know, closest I came to combat was in 56, the Suez Crisis. I remember sitting on the front lines, engines warm, borders sealed. We didn't know if America was going to side with England or France or remain neutral. I remember thinking that if Israel ended up on the wrong side of the political chessboard, I could be up in the air against the one refuge that saved my people. You know, it was a trip back to the United States where something happened that is why I'm here today. We were bringing back an old plane, a gunman albatross, not a sleek plane, more like a flying boat that had long since given up trying to be elegant. We were a small-knit crew, and coming along with us was Abe Jenkins. He was also a navigator and an officer on a different crew, but based at Molesworth Air Force Base. Abe was the finest man I've ever known. And when we got to New York, we were both in uniform, and we had time. So Abe was going home to Charleston, and I was going home to Gastonia, and we got on the train together. Now, when you're in uniform, there's supposed to be a certain kind of respect. We had the same bars on our shoulders, the same brass in our hats. But when we got to Washington, Abe looked at me and he said, "Time for me to go." I said, What do you mean? You're not changing trains. Abe said, "No, I'm changing cars. I have to go in the back now and sit where the blacks sit." That moment. I mean, here we were, in the same uniform, the same rank, flown the same missions for the same country, and he couldn't sit with me because of the color of his skin? Because the rules of a country that hadn't yet figured out how to keep its promises. You would have thought it would have hit me back growing up in South Carolina, but it didn't have the same impact as seeing Abe Jenkins in full uniform get up, walk to the back of the train to avoid stirring up trouble. Mr. Dorr, when I finished up with the Air Force, I came back and I worked to save money. I put the chemistry degree to work so that I could go to the North Carolina Law School. And that's where I met Julius Chambers. He was so inspirational. He was so committed. He was #1 in our class. He was the first black editor of the North Carolina Law Review. We faced all sorts of discrimination, but he never backed down. He worked them all. And I knew that after I graduated, I wanted to work with you. You were handling the toughest cases, voter rights, school segregation, but there weren't any openings. So I moved here and I took a job in the antitrust division. And when this call came, I knew that this was my chance. You know, Mr. Dorr, growing up in the segregated South and staying silent, I don't want to be silent anymore. I want to be part of the fight. And Mr. Dorr, I believe this is where the fight is. I believe I can help. I got the job. Next thing I knew, I was backing up and moving to Mississippi. They put me on voter rights case, first poll taxes, literacy tests. They were giving the black applicants these ridiculous, impossible questions. How many jelly beans in this jar? We would go from county to county, trying to break the system. We took on employment discrimination, school segregation, police brutality, Klan intimidation and violence. The people that we worked with, their courage was extraordinary. The black farmers, teachers, day workers, they risked everything. 1965, Kentucky. While I was in Mississippi, drafting motions, driving back roads, looking for witnesses, I had no inkling that a civil rights battle was happening on the slopes of Knott County, Kentucky. Ollie Widow Combs was making her stand. She had buried her husband that March, and she was taking care of a paralyzed son. In November, the Caperton Coal Company bulldozers showed up with a copy of a broad form deed to tear up her land and her family cemetery. Widow Combs and two of her boys lay down in front of the machines and refused to move. They were arrested, carried down the mountain. Later she'd laugh and say, I was just trying to be as heavy as I could be. I didn't think they'd be able to carry me down. So that Thanksgiving, she ate her holiday meal in the Knott County jail. Frail, elderly woman, flanked by her boys, giving thanks behind bars instead of in her own home. 1965, Mississippi. John Doerr transferred a new legal assistant into my office. Jean. Jean, she would work on jury profiles, witness preparation, comb through stacks and stacks of documents. Now, Jean came to the Department of Justice with her own sense of purpose. Her Quaker upbringing had taught her to speak truth to power, to act, not observe. That spirit, it matched my own. Now, sure, we were different kinds of fighters, but we were in the same fight. Jean had this way of seeing people, clients, colleagues, everyone, with genuine compassion. And she'd remind me that the work was about more than winning cases. It was about the lives we touched and the human stories behind every argument, behind every brief. 1971, Kentucky. One thing I learned from John Doerr is what he called the romance of the records. He would say that you start with the records, not the legal arguments, not the case law. You look first at the paper. You look at what it says, who signed it, when they signed it, and with the broad form deeds, it was the same story over and over again. Early 1900s, $5, $10. A man signs a piece of paper, often with just an X, that gives up the rights to the coal under his lot, with a clause that changes everything. Any means necessary to remove the coal. Now we write our pleadings, and we had two arguments. First, intent. Back when that deed was signed, there wasn't strip mining. The farmer who signed it was thinking pick and shovel mining. He couldn't envision the complete destruction of his home. And second, constitutional property rights. If the surface owner has no say, no control whatsoever over their property, what kind of property rights are those? So we file our pleas. The coal company lawyers, they argue that a contract's a contract, and the law doesn't care what people thought back then. It only cares about what they signed. Months pass. Depositions, expert witness testimony, arguments in front of the judge. The ruling comes down. We lose. Judge says the deeds were clear. The law must uphold contracts as written. Coal companies could do as they please. It meant that the coal companies had not just the right to dig, but to level, to poison, to ruin, with no responsibility to the people who lived there. We lost the first round, but that was just the beginning. We made the record. We prepared for what would happen next. 1965, North Carolina. A stick of dynamite lands on the front porch of Julius Chambers. He's woken by an explosion, shattering glass, and a warning from the Ku Klux Klan about the civil rights work that his small integrated law firm was doing. John Doerr, he heard the message as well, and sent two of us south to investigate, myself and Nick Flannery. Now, our assignment was clear. We were to talk with the police, comfort the family. After a morning of taking photographs, interviewing witnesses, we found ourselves in a diner in Charlotte, North Carolina, standing in line, silently. And I knew the pattern. I'd seen it before. Shattered glass, bricks torn from mortar, furniture tossed and destroyed. I'd seen it in Magdeburg. I just kept thinking about how fragile it all is. And you know, Nick, I was thinking about Jean. You know, she told somebody one time that he walks too fast, he talks too fast. When I hear him coming down the hallway, I hide in the library. And she told me that when she was in high school, up in Aberdeen, outside of Philadelphia, they were doing those Cold War air raid drills. You know, the ones where you duck under the desk and put your head in your hands. Jean, she refused. She said it was propaganda, promoting a psychology of fear and terror. They hauled her down to the principal's office. He called her a communist dupe and said, from now on, when the sirens go, you come to the front of the school, sit in front of that plate glass window, so you'll be the first one to be killed. You know, when Jean joined the Department of Justice, she had to do the same loyalty oath that we did. You know, the one where you say, we'll support and defend the Constitution of the United States. But Jean, being Jean, she added in so much as my conscience allows. They took her anyway. You know, Nick, working with her all these long days, working the night, lunches, dinners, she makes my life brighter, better. We've talked about marriage some, but I haven't yet. You know what, Nick? I'm going to call her right now. Hello? Jean, yeah, this is John. Yeah, I'm in Charlotte. I'm in the diner with Nick, and yeah, Julius is okay. We talked to the family. Yeah, I know I'm talking too fast, but I am standing still. Jean, and we've talked about it some, and I just needed to call you right now. Jean, will you marry me? Yes, you will. Yes, I just needed to hear your voice right now. I love you, Jean. I missed you, and we'll talk through all the details later. I'll see you soon. Well, Nick, it looks like I'm getting married. Who knew a payphone in a Charlotte diner could be so romantic? Clearly, I have a knack for grand gestures. 1974, Kentucky. We think we've done it. 2 years of work, and we've gotten a bill through the legislature, a consent law, that said before the coal companies could dig, they had to get permission of the surface owner. Finally, a law that put people above profit. Didn't last long. Kentucky Supreme Court threw it out. Said it was private delegation of state power. That consent law, gone. We lose again. That same year, 1974, our daughter Annie is born. And Jean keeps doing what she knows how to do. She's working with the community college there to help women in a system that wasn't designed with them in mind. She would walk them literally from building to building until they felt like they belonged. Now when our son Michael started school, we realized that there was no playground. So we built one, borrowing coal company equipment to scrape the land level. Jean, she became the president of the PTA. She wrote the first grants for the Gifted and Talented program, and she brought science tents to the schools with projections on the ceiling so that Floyd County kids could see the universe and reach for the stars. Now, after that continued to grow. Years later, when I was on the board of Moorhead State University, we were able to work to build the East Kentucky Science Center, a real planetarium right here in the mountains. You know, out in David, a coal camp that many people had forgotten. People were still paying rent, even though they stopped digging years ago. So we worked to set up a community development corporation. We did the legal work, we fought for utilities, and we turned a company town into a community owned by the people who live there. By the 1980s, Prestonsburg, we weren't outsiders anymore. It was home. And the people, they were organized. There were meetings, petitions, marches, voices raised together. And we with AppleRed, the Appalachian Research and Defense Fund, we were right there with them. They came together and they formed what was called the Kentucky Fair Tax Coalition, KFTC, with the shared belief that property owners should have a say and that the coal company should pay their fair share. And we at AppleRed, we would work with them. We'd share strategies, we'd hold workshops, and we'd draft bills. Years later, work, 81, we put one of those bills through the legislature, Mineral Deed Act. Carefully written to avoid the problems of that consent law that got overturned. The Mineral Deed Act said that if the contract didn't spell out how the coal was to be removed, then the company had to use the same methods that were in effect when the deed was signed. Pick and shovel running. The first test case came with Elizabeth Wooten. She was a widow in Perry County, Kentucky. She buried her husband on that land. Coal company bulldozers show up to tear up the land and the family cemetery, and she files an injunction with AppleRed right there with her. Wins. Goes up to the Court of Appeal and wins there too, which meant that the companies couldn't mine her land, but they kept digging on the land all around her, leaving her home an island, an ocean of strip-mined wheat. Next big case, 1987, was Akers versus Baldwin. We put everything we had into that case, arguing that the Mineral Deed Act was constitutional. We argued that it honored contract law and human dignity. And we had precedent behind us. We had principle behind us. We had the people behind us. When the ruling came down, I read it once, and again, it didn't just rule against us. They shut the door completely. The court said the legislature can't reinterpret contracts, that that's up to the courts, not the lawmakers, to say what the deed meant. And they throw out that law. It's an unconstitutional violation of the separations of powers. Once again, the Broad-Ford deed was law of the land, license to destroy. The surface owner is powerless prevent the destruction of his property when mineral rights were held under these deeds. Powerless. That was the word that I would carry into living rooms and front porches and small town meetings, explaining to families that the Kentucky Supreme Court said they had no power to protect their own homes. They didn't just rule against us and shut the door, they nailed it shut. Powerless. 1938, Germany. Morning after Christmas. I woke up, I was on that mattress in my kitchen, and the stormtroopers were at the door. They'd come for my father. There was nothing we could do. There was nothing anyone could do. My father, he just stood there like he'd already come to accept it. But my mother, she wasn't going to let him go without one small act. So, like any good Jewish mother, she turned to these men with guns and cold eyes, and she said, "Can you wait? I want to make him a sandwich." And they waited, maybe out of shock, but just for a moment. And then they left. I'll never forget all the things she could have said or done. She chose that one small act as if somehow it could protect him. That she finished making the sandwich. She folded in a cloth and she pressed it into my hand and said, "Run. Take this to your father." I didn't think. I just ran. 7-year-old. Running through streets filled with glass, hair thick with smoke. I saw him. Two Gestapos were leading him down the street like a criminal. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I just handed him the sandwich. And then they turned and led him away. I stood there watching my father go down the street, not knowing if I'd ever see him again. Powerless. (1963), Mississippi. The most important thing I learned in Mississippi, it wasn't about winning, it was about losing. Fannie Lou Hamer was a sharecropper who lived her whole life in a system designed to keep her powerless. In June of 1963, she and some other activists were driving back from a voter education workshop. And they got to Winona. They stopped at the bus stop to go to the restaurant to get something to eat. It was their night. They were arrested, hauled down to the local jail. They put Fannie Lou Hamer in a small dark cell in the back of the jail. They brought in 2 black inmates and gave them blackjacks and ordered them to beat her again and again. When she collapsed and couldn't get up, they ordered her to stay still so that they could keep beating her. When it was over, when she was released, she would never be the same. She carried those injuries with her the rest of her life. And for us, it was one of the most clear-cut cases we had. We had medical records, we have eyewitnesses, and we had an all-white jury. 1963, Mississippi, that told the story. The verdict came back, not guilty. It was my job to go tell Fannie Lou Hamer. Miss Hamer, I'm so sorry, we lost. The jury, they didn't convict those men who did this. They're walked free. I sat across from Fannie Lou Hamer that day in her living room, expecting to deliver another crushing blow, expecting the weight of the verdict to settle into her bones the way it settled into mine. She looked at me, and she said, "John, I've been losing my whole life." She told me about growing up on a cotton farm, picking cotton from dawn to dusk, hands raw, stomach empty, seeing men and women toil their whole lives for nothing but debt. And she told me about the first time she tried to register to vote. How they held a gun to her head to show her what would happen to black women who stepped out of line. And then she kept pushing, kept organizing. They threw her in jail and they beat her until she couldn't walk. She looked at me, she looked right through me, really, and she said, "John, don't tell me about losing. That verdict today, that was their loss. Because now the whole world knows. They can't hide it now. They can take away my work, they can take away my home, but they didn't take away my voice. And as long as I have that, I ain't never lost." I've never heard anything like that before. And I understood something that day in that living room that I kept with me the rest of my life. Losing, it wasn't the verdict. It was giving up. You know, I had come to Mississippi thinking that the law could fix most anything. That if you built the case high enough, if you got the right facts together, eventually the truth would prevail. Fannie Lou Hamer knew better. She knew justice doesn't just happen in courtrooms. It happens out there, in the streets, in the fields, in the voices of people who refuse to be silenced. And I saw her fight on. That next summer, 1964, she stood in front of the Democratic National Convention, and she made them listen. She told them what Mississippi had done. And I knew then that power, real power, the kind of power that no governor, no court, no jury can take away, is in people who will get up again and again, no matter how many times they've been knocked down. As Fannie Lou Hamer told us, we have to make our own power. 1987, Kentucky. The Supreme Court thrown out. The Mineral Deed Act, broad form deed, was then law. And the coal companies were strip mining, blasting mountaintops. Some people felt like we had fought as hard as we could, but we lost. We have to accept it now. It was clear this wasn't going to be won in courts. There was only so much that we lawyers could do. But our clients, they weren't through fighting. Elizabeth Wood. My case was a test case for the Mineral Deed Act. The Kentucky Supreme Court threw it out. Now those coal companies are back on my land. They want to strip my land. Well, they're never going to strip my land. As long as I'm alive, they'll never strip my land. As long as any of my 11 children are alive, they'll never strip my land. Acres. We got multitudes that know what's right. Yet 4 people in Frankfurt say it ain't right. Well, I want to tell you something. In my opinion, the coal companies own the courts of Kentucky. I want to tell you something. What makes you think you have the right to come in here and take our land, to kill our land, so we can't live on our land? Shame on you. Shame on the courts of Kentucky. Think about what the courts did here. In the early 1970s, we go to the court and we say, this contract, it's not fair, it's a trick. You lose. Coal companies win. So we go to the legislature, we work to pass a law to change this, that consent law. The Supreme Court says you didn't do it right, throws it out, lose again. So years later, a decade later, we're back. We have a new law written to avoid that problem. This time they say the legislator can't do that at all. It's only up to us to decide, and big coal wins again. So what's left? It's only one thing. You have to change the rules. Change the Constitution itself. Our campaign, it wasn't backed by wealth or political clout. Small communities came together, community activists, county to county, and they renamed the KFTC. They called it now the Kentuckians for the Commonwealth. And under the motto, Save Our Home Place, we went from county to county to make sure everyone knew what was at stake. We found legislators willing to stand up. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I know this is not an easy vote. There are powerful interests in this room who rather this amendment never see the light of day. But this is not about them. This is about the people of Kentucky. People who've had their land taken, their homes undermined, their rights ignored. We are not asking you to ban mining. We're not asking you to take anything away. We're just asking you to give the people the right to decide. If the coal companies believe they are right, let them make their case to the voters. Please do not silence people before they've had their say. Now, even though broad form deeds really only impacted 11 counties in eastern Kentucky, we went county by county to make sure that every legislature knew what was at stake. And the legislators stood up, and they put that Constitution Amendment on the ballot. And families marched from Pike to Fulton to make sure that everyone knew this wasn't just an eastern Kentucky problem. This was a statewide outrage. November 8th, 1988, election day. 87% of Kentuckians vote to amend the Constitution. The most ever for any person or issue in the history of Kentucky. And we won in every one of Kentucky's 120 counties. This wasn't just about the land. This was about belonging. This was about saying that this is our home, and no court, no company, no clause in the Constitution has the right to tear it apart. We didn't just win the vote. We reclaimed our land, our homes. 1938, Germany. After they took my father away, my mother had to make decisions, hard decisions. She sent me to Frankfurt to live with my Aunt Ellie and Uncle Benjamin. I was just 7, being separated from my mother and my brother, but she felt it was better that way. They had a son named Bubi who was about my age. For a while, it felt almost normal, just 2 boys playing as the darkness surrounded us. And she also asked the Josephs, or babysitter's family, to take my brother Harry, while she moved from friend's house to friend's apartment, working to get together all the paperwork that we needed to be able to leave Germany. We were like leaves scattered in the wind, trying to stay out of reach. My father and his brother Zemi and 125 other Magdeburg Jews, they were taken first to the local jail, much too small for all of them. And then they were put on trucks, sent to Buchenwald concentration camp. This was 1938, and this was before the camps were designed for the final solution, the mass killing of the Jews, but they were still places of punishment, places designed to break the spirit. 25 men died there, either of their own hands or from the cruelty of it all. And my father, he was determined to survive. After 17 days, he and my Uncle Zemi came back to Magdeburg. Their heads had been shaved bald. They were gaunt, their clothes hung on them, their eyes had a look in them that I'd never seen before, but they were alive. And they'd been given 30 days to get out of Germany. They didn't have a choice. They had to leave. My father, he worked tirelessly, trying to find any way out, any way to get help. His sister, Mary, lived in Rotterdam, Holland, along with her husband, Herman, and their 3 children. And Uncle Herman was able to arrange for us to get a green card so that we could go to Holland. But we weren't allowed to live with him. So we were put in a detention center. We had one room, 10 by 10, 2 sets of bunk beds, bookshelf for the 4 of us. That's where we waited and tried to plan for the future. My father, being who he was, he didn't stay idle. He believed that even in the face of uncertainty, in the face of darkness, you had to keep moving forward. So he started a school for the children there. He would gather us together every day. He would teach us mathematics, history, Hebrew. He would teach us that even though everything had been taken away from us, they hadn't taken away our ability to learn, our ability to think. And for the children, it gave us something to do, something to focus on. And for our parents, it gave them hope. Maybe there was a future for us beyond these walls. One day my father was summoned in to the central office. There was a group of Dutch organizers there, and they were setting up a new, bigger detention camp for the Jews in Westerbork. And they'd heard about my father's school. And they said that you are going to come to Westerbork and start a school there. My father, he had a premonition. He politely declined and got himself out of that meeting. After the Nazis took over Holland, Westerbork was turned into a transit center where Jews went first before they were sent to Auschwitz. After that meeting, my father knew he had to do something. So the next chance he had, he went into the committee. There was a committee that would meet, and they would decide who would go on the next ship and where they would go. And he went into that room and he heard a voice. "Rudy Rosenberg, what are you doing here?" It was Dr. Mosher, the man who had come to Magdeburg that my father had shown around when he was raising money for Jews leaving Europe. So my father explained to him everything that happened and asked him for his help. And Dr. Mosher was able to arrange for us to get on one of the next ships out. And in February of 1940, we boarded that ship, hearts full of fear and hope. The ship, every inch of it, was filled with families like ours that were fleeing the horrors of Europe. When we got to the English Channel, they stopped the ship and they searched it for contraband. As we crossed the Atlantic, they had a lookout placed in the top mast, keeping an eye out for mines. You know, the thing I remember most about that ship was watching The Wizard of Oz. They showed it to the children on the ship there. That moment when Dorothy steps out of this world of black and white into this brilliant color is magic. This little girl swept away, trying to find her way home. The voyage, seemed endless. It was the cold sea, the gray sky, the metal of the ship, until we arrived February 22nd, 1940 in New Jersey. And there were flags everywhere. The vivid red, white, and blue breaking the monotony of the voyage. I thought the flags were for us. I thought America was welcoming us. Later we found out it was George Washington's birthday. We were the fortunate ones. So many others had their paths blocked. They didn't get out. My Uncle Zemi and my grandmother, Therese, they were scheduled to go on one of the next ships out. They put their belongings on the ship the night before, and that night, the Nazis bombed the harbor, destroyed all the ships. They were trapped. They were sent first to Buchenwald and then to Dresdenstadt. Tried to make some semblance of life in that camp. My Uncle Zemi, he even had married a woman named Betty. Then he was sent to Auschwitz. He put him in charge of the leatherworking shop. He started to speak out against the suffering, against the Nazis. And when he was in line to go into the gas chambers, he broke and ran for the electric fence. They shot him back. My grandmother, Therese, she was in the camp until 1944, and then she, too, was sent to Auschwitz. She was murdered. So many others who had families, who had dreams, who had lives they had stolen by hate. Friends, families, neighbors, they just disappeared. My Aunt Polly, Uncle Benjamin, they too sent to Auschwitz. They perished. Their son, Bubby, his fate was the same. Just a boy. I will carry their memories with me always. My Uncle Zemi Rosenberg, grandmother Therese Rosenberg, Aunt Ellie, Uncle Benjamin, Bubby, Joseph's, Aunt Mary, Uncle Herman, 3 children, and a 4th on the way. Millions of others who did not find a new home. My faith and my family taught me the door devoid, from generation to generation. We pass on more than names and photographs. We pass on the things that matter. Memories, courage, faith, the quiet belief that we are part of something larger than ourselves. My father's voice reading from the Torah, my mother's hands teaching me how to light the Sabbath candles. These aren't just rituals, traditions, they're threads. Taking me back to my grandparents, to my great-grandparents, to a long line of people who believed that you could make the world a better place. And one act of kindness, one act of courage at a time. And the door teaches us that we don't leave them behind. We carry them with us through the way we remember, through the way we live, through the way we fight for a better world. 2024, Germany. I'm standing in that courtyard in Magdeburg, near the apartment where I grew up, and they are installing Stolpersteine, stumbling stones. They were designed by a German artist, Gunter Denning, and the idea was as powerful as it is simple. Put memories not in museums, but at our feet, where people may walk along and stumble, look down, see a name, and remember the people who lived there. Today, there are 4 brass plaques glistening in the sun, with the names Rudolf Rosenberg, my father, my mother Gerta Rosenberg, my younger brother Harry, and me, Hans Meinhard Rosenberg. That was my name before I came to America in 1940. A name tied to nights of terror like Kristallnacht, a name gone, but not forgotten. When we arrived in America, the immigration officer told my mother that Hans would become John. So I became John Rosenberg. Hans Meinhard Rosenberg had crossed the Atlantic and started a new life in America. 2024, Kentucky. Something remarkable happened. They named a square in Prestonsburg, Kentucky, Rosenberg Square. Friends, families, neighbors gathered to honor the work that Jean and I had done there. And I told them then, and I will tell you now, nothing we did was done alone. And this is too big an honor for any one name. And Gene said that they should rename the square every year so others could feel the same sense of community and gratitude that we felt. So now my name is in two squares. One, a memorial to a life stolen away by hate, and another, a testament to a life lived with love and justice. Between Hans Meinhard Rosenberg and John Rosenberg, it's not just a name change. It's a journey towards learning how to live a life that matters. I was raised with three lessons. It's the document, not charity, but righteous giving. If others are in need, I am incomplete. The door of more. We are not the first, we are not the last. We carry on what was carried down to us, door for door. And tikkun olam. The world is broken. Our duty is not to weep for it. Our duty is to fix it. Do you know, life taught me one more lesson. I had thought that justice was the end of the road. That if you won the case, if you changed the law, you were done. Justice without home? It's not enough. Gene taught me that. And so did the people who trusted me to stand with them. You fight for justice, but you stay for home. You stay so no one has to fight. That's the real work. That's what we were trying to do. Still are. We've stumbled tonight. We've remembered. The world is still broken. It's our duty to use whatever talent, skill, experience each of us individually have to try to fix it. Because now is the time to do the work. That's the path forward. Stone by stone. you so much for coming out tonight. We're going to take a 10-minute break. And we'll have a conversation with John and Jean Rosenberg. And I'll be there too, Jim. See you back here in 10. It's up here. Yeah. Why did you come to us? I used to be a public defender in Kentucky. Yeah, and he was on our commission. It's part of the legal aid across the country, but New York's legal aid is different. It's not public defenders. What he was doing is civil. So not people accused of crime, but people who have been held with landlords and Did you get one of those postcards? They have they're out in the lot. I need to write down my
That was a long distance call back.
I actually worked with somebody at a convention, so I'm here for the work thing, and we're trying to find a place I could do it. For one more day, I'll be back Thanks, yeah, please give me a call. We've got one of those instructions on the website. You need to explain anything else on the website.
You had the beer before.
We'll start the talk back in about 3 minutes. I didn't save up on my phone, so that's why I didn't.
Yeah. I like to see
I remember playing tennis. We played tennis next to my house.
Play tennis. They're all women. No,
Two more minutes and we'll obviously. Thank you. All right, we will start the talk back. bit on a clock because there's another group coming in at 9.
Oh, we got it.
Yeah.
My dad. It was later here.
Yeah, there's now some seats at the center because there's a person. Yeah, pictures are fine with all of this. Yeah. Thank you. It was live streaming, so there were people still watching us from around the country. Yes, still live streaming. Thank you so much for coming today. I just want to, I'll kind of just start by saying, John, how was that? He's seen this maybe 10 times now. What are your thoughts sitting in the audience and being part of
Well,
this?
I'm proud of you. I just think you do a remarkable job.
Yes.
And it is true, for the most part, we have to say we read the scripts, and Ned, and you worked so hard. You found interviews of us we forgot them. Yeah. But none are
He
embarrassing.
did propose over the phone.
And Nick Flannery, who you should identify, Nick was a lawyer. He's actually next to me on the other side of Steve Pollock, who was
In the picture of the Department
of
of
the
Justice.
department.
Not here.
And Nick is a lawyer, eventually became a judge in Boston. He tried the Boston school desegregation case. I think he's with the Center for Law and Education at the time. Great lawyer, who actually was in the division before we were. But he was there, and he would say we were in the Piedmont Diner, or whatever the diner was called, and all the rest is history. Yeah. The honeymoon continues, I'm happy to say.
59 years later.
59 years, yeah. So I'll answer the one question I get, and then we'll open it up to questions for John and Jean. People just ask me, what, and why are you doing this? So my background is I'm a Kentucky public defender, retired from there. And I met John and Jean. John was on the commission and oversees the state public defender system for 30 years plus. And as I worked my way up in the leadership, I would go to those meetings and sit in the back of the room. And Jean would always come with me because it's a 2.5-hour drive from Prestonsburg. So at first I got to know Jean. And then when I moved up to the front table, got to know John more through that work. Did not know John's whole background at all. When I retired, he gave me a book called This Is Home Now, that's interviews with the Holocaust survivors who ended up in Kentucky. And I sort of learned a bit more about his story there. My background is in theater for that. I've been acting since I was 5. And I discovered when I was in middle school, 13, 14, at the Lawrence Public Library, VHS tape of Henry Fonda's performance of Clarence Darrow that I would rent over and over again, pay overdue fees. And as I've been doing this and talking about it, I guess I wanted to be both of those people. So I went into acting in the law and criminal defense. Always wanted to do a play like that, but didn't realize until about 2 years ago that I knew the person to do it about, that I knew him personally. So I asked Jean first for permission to do it, and then asked John. And in the parking lot in Frankfort, Kentucky, and John's like, why would anyone want to see a play about me? I think you know why. He's so humble and started on this journey. I had a great help that there have been a lot of interviews with John and Jean over the years, the Smithsonian, that book. There's been talks that they've done, papers that John wrote. So I had a starting place with the research. So for about 8 months, worked on this, sending them draft after draft, doing workshop readings where a lot of my friends saw one of these maybe a year ago, a different version of it. It's been through at least 12 big changes along the way before it got here. And now I'm performing it wherever will have me. Many shows in Kentucky, North Carolina, Missouri, and around. And I'm glad to bring it wherever people want to hear this story. I want to share the story. I'm just asked to be help for travel. Anything that, like half of the proceeds tonight, about $1,000, is going to Apple Red Any questions for John or Jean, or I'll take them if they're.
Let me just add, though, the book that Jeff was talking about, This Is Home Now, is written by a wonderful woman named Arvin Donahue, who had initially worked, who spent a summer at or more than a year at the Holocaust Museum in Washington. Was interested then in how survivors lived in communities, especially rural communities, not in Washington. And so when she came back to Kentucky, she rounded up about 9 of us who she interviewed and then summarizes in this book. It's in paperback, so you can get it from Amazon. I just ordered it. Usually I have a few copies with us, because if you buy one, the money also goes to Apple Red. And it's a pretty powerful book. We had an exhibit at the History Center in Lexington a few years ago at a symposium that was based on the book. So her name is Arvin, and she was actually at this same presentation which Jeff did in Lexington just, what was it, Sunday? Last Sunday. So again, a lot of friends, and thanks a lot for coming. And I want to tell you, there's some donor cards as you go out the door. And I don't want to forget, we started another nonprofit about 20 years ago called the Appalachian Citizens Law Center, ACLC. It's in Whitesburg, Kentucky, that has done most of the coal-related work that we started, mine safety, environmental issues, and black lung disease, representing coal miners. And one of the early lawyers, Brent Boker, is here. He lives in New York now. But I wanted to mention that nonprofit, so if you have a little more money to spread around, you'll find them on the website called Appalachian Citizens Law Center. I think that's
What questions do you have? Yes.
What was the name of that book again?
This Is Home Now.
There's some powerful interviews of some of the other folks. I always tell people this is really my parents' story to a large extent, but the other interviews of folks who were in the camps and others.
Jeff, Ned Pillersdorf, I'm a Kentucky lawyer. You know, listening to the play sure made the Kentucky Supreme Court probably appropriately look terrible. But I guess John can answer that. It was all a male court, but something happened in 1993 that John Rosenberg had something to do with it. What happened in 1993, John?
Well, it just happens that we elected his wife to be the first woman of the Supreme Court of Kentucky.
Samantha's mother.
After I left Appalachian, after 30 years, I've actually been of counsel to Ned's Pillersdorf law firm this entire time, and I have to tell you, probably, if you didn't see him up close, he's wearing a shirt that says Ned for Congress. Ned is the Democratic, I think after the May primary, he has no opposition, but will be the Democratic nominee for the 5th District, Congressional District in Kentucky. He's running against Hal Rogers, the longest serving congressman. He's 88, and not heard from very much these days, but brought a lot of pork back, and he will be running against, Ned's running against him for that congressional seat, which is the 5th District at home and covers Appalachian counties from Floyd. How many counties in it?
33. You might mention that Hal Rogers voted to slash the legal services. I guess we should gratuitously mention that, right?
But what really motivated Ned to run, I think, was that Rogers voted for that big, bad, beautiful bill, and if he'd voted against it, it wouldn't have passed. So, just to say, I'm proud of the fact that he's running. Hope he'll win. Help him in any way I can if you want to. This isn't necessarily political, but after you do your fill out the
Donation envelope.
no, it says Ned, look for Ned for Congress. He's a very good lawyer, I'll tell you that.
Other questions?
Former public defender, right?
Yes. He's famous in the public defender world. getting us paid. He sued the state and that helps actually pay public defenders in Kentucky rather than
King
before I started.
Prestonsburg is a public defender.
Did you have a question?
I have a question, if you don't mind, kind of following up on the connection between your work and public defense work, which I found, I'm a current public defender, a lot of the story resonated with me in ways that I'll be reflecting on, but I was wondering if you have any thoughts you'd share about how your work history and life history connects to what you see as, you know, the current work of public defense today, or any advice you have for public defenders here in the audience.
I try to recruit lawyers for public defenders wherever I can and for civil legal aid. I mean, I'm more motivated by public defenders than prosecutors, even though we need compassionate prosecutors and folks who are fair. I don't know what I'd say beyond that. I do think it is so important that people have good public defense, hopefully like yours. I mean, we see cases being overturned. We see people who are saved from the death penalty by this, what do we call it? What's the name of the groups? And we have one in Kentucky. I'm a little bit tired. The folks who are doing death penalty work. The what?
The coalition,
Because
against, like the coalition against the death penalty.
yeah, but
Capital.
the students, the ones that are, so many students are working with, in any event, these folks that are investigating these cases. There's a new book out, there was a book out that by John Grisham and McCloskey called Framed, which I just had started, which is just a series of cases where folks were either killed,
The Innocence
got the
Project.
death penalty or
Innocence Project.
otherwise. I'm sorry?
Like the Innocence Project.
Innocence Project, that's who I couldn't think of. When you get to be in your nineties, you forget names, and you forget, it's hard to believe I forget the Innocence Project.
But you don't forget stories, you connect with those. Paul?
I'm Jeff Dustin.
My cousin Paul.
It was,
Yeah.
it was amazing. The show was amazing. So the question actually for John. And maybe it was said in the play, and I didn't catch it. I assume, sir, you're in your 90s. Could you just, for all of us and for my daughter, could you tell us how old were you in 1938, sir?
Well, I was born in 31, so I was seven when I started
years old.
school.
I knew it was something like that. I just didn't. But I wanted to make sure I heard it from you. You were 7 years old
Right.
at the time of Kristallnacht and at the time of your escaping from Germany.
Yeah, you know, if you think back to when you were 7, you have some pretty good memories.
Yeah.
And I do remember, I mean, the Kristallnacht that Jeff was reenacting was the way that it was. I remember learning to ride a bike on that courtyard and where we lived and the family that night and being on the mattress. Now, some of people may say we've told that story so often, but I went into the synagogue the next day and saw that they say they dynamited the synagogue instead of burning it down because there was a hospital nearby. In most of the cities throughout Germany, the synagogues were burned down. And so that's why they didn't really, I mean, they pretty much did in this old synagogue, which was, I want to say, close to, built in 1850 or 1860. There are no pictures of the outside of that synagogue. You know, I remember, and I have a little PowerPoint that when I've been talking to school groups with our family, it goes into a little more detail, but shows some of the other damage in the building and that sort of thing.
Thank you.
Also has a telephone book on it that with from 1938 in Magdeburg, which originally put in there, because many of you remember there was this period where people, and I suppose there are still deniers around, who say the Holocaust didn't happen. So,
Yeah, in Kentucky, I don't know what time period it was now, the Holocaust deniers got very strong in Kentucky, and the legislature that was Democratic controlled back then, passed a law that's still in the books about teaching high school students about the Holocaust. So there's a group of teachers working, they're gonna show videos of this play and developing a curriculum to be used in high schools across Kentucky. Glad to share that when it goes, when
What
it's
year
done.
did they institute that law? Was that recent?
I can't remember right now, my head's full of lines.
But it's probably recent, conclusion?
About 10 years ago, we were one of
Okay, fairly
30,
recent.
about 30 states in the United States that require either, and our statute says Holocaust or genocide education, but it's been interpreted primarily to involve deal with the Holocaust. And there are a series of teachers who are at the University of Kentucky primarily. In fact, I was on a Zoom call. They've organized a group of East Kentucky teachers that get on annually and have a full day discussion about the curriculum and the way to teach the Holocaust to kids.
One thing I just would throw that what John talked earlier and just listening to Paul's question that with the, as this was working through and I'm sending their drafts, they started doing their own research about their lives to help fill it in as well and discovered in 1981 or remembered in 1981 at Thanksgiving, I believe John's younger brother Harry, who's 90 now, and went to his birthday party a couple of weeks ago.
Little brother.
Little brother. He is a little smaller. They recorded their parents in '81 at Thanksgiving, and they had cassette tapes that were turned into CDs and then transcribed. And I got the transcription while I'm rewriting this show. And two big things that, as a storyteller, just jump out at me. That's great. So the one is the man who was in their apartment's wife, real name Elizabeth, was the midwife for John, and that's her. John's mother explains that in his tapes. When I sent that version of the script to John, he was like, "That is really powerful. I understand why you want it use it for the play. It's not true. You can go ahead and use it." So I had to send him the transcripts back and say, "That's what your mom says." So that's in there, and then the other one was the Dr. Mosier connection was not something that had come up in any of John's interviews, and he was the man who and there's a long part of this great day that Rudy and Dr. Mosier had of going around with all the families and eating together, and then he was the one who happened to be there just when they needed him, so that they, one of the things that's powerful to me about this and consistent with all these stories is just the combination of this incredible hard work that his parents did, but just luck of the draw of who gets out, who doesn't get out, what day you leave. A day later, his uncle and his grandmother aren't able to get out. Running into Dr. Mosier, and I can say, some reason saying no to Vesterbork and not going there so he could be sent home. All
And the
these things.
Joseph family, that is the babysitters, who had lived above us in our apartment, had moved, and my mom brought my brother there to their home. Their son, Arno, the babysitter had a younger brother named Arno, and he was sent to the United States on a kinderlift. There were a lot of children, some Jewish families saw the handwriting on the wall and started sending their kids out of the country to escape what was to be the Holocaust. And then Arno was the babysitter couldn't go, she was sick. He was sent to Detroit, and then from Detroit, eventually he joined the army, was with Patton, and then he came back by way of England and married a woman in the RAF. They ended up in Detroit 3 years ago. I got an email that said, "Are you John Rosenberg from Magdeburg?" And it turned out that he had 3 daughters, and 2 of them ended up in Kentucky. One of them was a psychologist, because I forget I'm in New York, I keep thinking everybody's from Kentucky. There's a hospital called Cardinal Hill, and one of the daughters, these are adults and grandmothers now, but is Nancy Wright. So that's Arno, but Arno's family, the mom, the dad, and the daughter were murdered. There's a fairly powerful letter that the father of Arno had sent by way of a Catholic priest to him. He hadn't heard, but the father kind of says, he was a businessman, I'm a laborer now, and we've got another week or 2 because they come and get us. Your mother's sick, and things don't look very good, but be a good boy, stay out of politics. And it goes on, and it's kind of a teary letter, but that just another family that didn't make it because they didn't get their paperwork together. You had to have a sponsor in this country to get you, someone who says on the dotted line that will support you with, if you can't support yourself. So my father's two sisters, two of the sisters had gotten married and had gotten jobs here, but they were here only a short time and didn't have any money. One of them found a distant relative in Manhattan who was an architect who had already sponsored a couple of other families, and she was able to get him to sign the papers to sponsor us. That's the other thing you needed to do. I remember there's an article in the New York Times, a letter, Mike Weinrib wrote an article about AppleRed when we were in funding problems in the New York Times Magazine, but he also had an article which was primarily about correspondence between families in Germany and their counterparts in the United States, where they were trying to get out, but could not, like the Josephs. I mean, so many. Probably the State Department wasn't particularly interested in having Jewish immigrants. They had finally convinced Roosevelt to do that, to say we need to open up our gates.
So before we have to cut off, I just wanted, one of the huge takeaways for me from this experience of working on a play and talking to them, and hopefully comes across through the play, is to continue doing the work. And there are different ways that we can all do the work. And just John and Jean are still going strong. Jean, can you tell us a little bit what you do?
No, I see Sean has a question. Do you have a question?
I'll talk to you afterwards. The question was like the piece of the play about the relatives in Auschwitz. How did you come upon that information that your uncle who was shot in the back trying to leave behind for the gas chamber?
That's one of the stories. There's some dispute about exactly what happened with Zemi. One of the stories says that they hung him. This is one of them.
Did you talk to people
We know
who were
that
able
he
to get
was-
out of the camp? Or?
Well, we met his widow. Gina and I met his widow in Israel when we went over. She had remarried. Her name was Betty Schnook. She was a wonderful person. But there are some other versions about that, including whether he killed himself. But it's a good question. By the way, we have several. Tom Beringer, we have Lorraine Gormley. Is Lorraine still here?
Yep.
There's Lorraine Weegis. And AppleRed folks who were with us a long, long time. I should spend a long time. Linda Pollock is here. Linda's dad, Steve Pollock, was Assistant Attorney General of the Civil Rights Division. And more importantly, I don't know if she can remember, but Jean and I, her parents, when they were youngsters, had never had a vacation. And they said to us right after we were newlyweds, if you could come over and spend a week or two with our 4 children, we might go on vacation for the first time, right?
I do remember.
So, this is.
I'm not sure why it isn't in your story.
Important part. I just wanted, Jean,
Yeah,
can you share what you're doing with the federal prisons?
Oh, good.
Oh, when I was in Prestonsburg, as a Quaker, I long had information about Quakers' activity in prison visiting, and there's an agency called Prisoner Visitation and Support, and they respond when prisoners ask for a visitor. They try to find volunteers, and I was one of those volunteers. We have a maximum security federal prison in Floyd County where I lived, and I would go once a month. And I found it to be an extraordinary experience because I thought, what do I have to give a prisoner in a federal prison? And the truth is, just the humanity of knowing that person's name and he knowing that you're on the outside
that you all
And it also exists everywhere.
call Prisoner Visitation Support, pbs.org. They're looking for volunteers.
Is there
Yeah,
time for
but
another
they
question?
have about 300 or 400
Yeah.
people around the country.
We're gonna wrap up in a couple minutes.
I thought that the principles, the repairing the world, that structuring your play according to the principles, repairing the world, I wrote
To
righteous.
Kuna Love.
Kuna Love is repairing the world, Lador Vidor is generation to generation, and Tzedakah is righteous giving. And
Yeah.
those come in all of John's talks. That wasn't something I, was needed to be there.
Okay.
And it gave me a structure.
Well, I've never heard him talk, and I'm a non-observant Jew.
Yeah.
And did you know those principles before you did the play? I mean, before
I
you read the
knew,
interview?
I was aware of them. I wasn't necessarily living my life by them the way that John does.
Right.
But, it's researching it and
Yeah.
it's, I try to live my way of life. I've learned a lot about, I'm a
They're-
non-observant
They're
Jew.
very powerful, yeah.
Yes.
Hi, I just want to, I'm not a lawyer or public defender or scholar. I am a theater person.
Cool.
So I just want to say, Jeff, theatrically, the way you staged it, put it together, you were an actor.
So,
I
one
wanted to
last
say,
question.
I wanted to say thank you to Jean, John, and Jeff, because I think we all, most of us know Jean and John, and Jeff, I guess, I don't know you, but from different ways, but you kind of piece this story together, and I think we all learn very valuable things. And I did also have one question. Jean, is he talking any slower now?
You've seen him tonight. His incredible memory. He might go up on like somebody's name, but he remembers way more about you. Lines him like one last
This
question.
is just a comment. When you had the scene where John proposed to Jean on the phone, when I was living in Barberville working for Apple Red, I remember, I just had this memory when you were doing that scene of John coming over to our house. He was visiting the office, and he would always when he was at our house, he would just get on our phone for hours. And, how did John survive without the cell phone?
I do want to say, there was a wonderful lawyer named Steve Sanders who was with Apple Red in Prestonsburg when Lorraine was there, still there when Sean was there, and then became the first director of ACLC when Red Booker was there. Unfortunately, he passed away about 3 or 4 months ago. He was best man at Ned's wedding, so he was an important person in all our lives. He was a litigation director at Apple Red, and I asked him to be the first director at ACLC when we got some funding from this wonderful lady in Connecticut back 20 years ago. So it's just nice as a way to conclude to think about him while you all are here. I just thought I wanted to mention that.
Thanks. And just seeing, this happens every time we do a talk back. This is John's personality, is he deflects and lifts the people up around him. That's kind of who he is, which is another wonderful piece of it. Just one other quick story. They've now moved to Lexington, Kentucky, which is fortunate to me, they're closer to me. So recently went, picked them up, took them downtown Lexington for the No Kings rally. I've lived in Lexington for 36 years. They knew more people there than I did. I brought chairs thinking they'd want to sit down. They marched 2 miles, and I had to run to keep up with them. So they're still doing the work, still doing it. Encourage you to use whatever talents, skills you have to fix the world. There are postcards if you didn't get that with more information on how to get in touch with me if you want to help me share their story anywhere else. I would be very happy to do that. Thank you so much for coming out.